I mix really loud, depending on genre. I'm definitely at -9 and -8. I can create the feeling of anger or stress by having the vocal be too soft in a section. The entire mix bus has to be there at the beginning, and I mix into clipper and limiter because it immediately affects the size of the record. Most of the time, I find that sidechaining is not necessary. When they ask me, so how do I get the good bass? I was like, the problem is not your technique of mixing the bass. The problem is...
Today we explore techniques to make your mix come alive with Richard Furch. He'll share insights on low-end mixing techniques, his work with Prince, and much more. Richard has worked with Prince, Usher, Macy Gray, and Frank Ocean. Hey Richard, welcome to the podcast. I'm really excited to have you here today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it so much.
So let's dive in. And I was wondering, how does being a pianist help you when you're mixing?
That's a good question. Personally, I think like every engineer should obviously be a musician, and it would be even better if they started as a musician, so to speak. Maybe they become a frustrated musician over time and go like, well, maybe there's something else in the music industry I can do instead of just playing. But obviously the background helps tremendously. Not just like being able to communicate with people and making musicians feel like they're understood, but also kind of like communicating, hey, I've been where you've been. I understand your plight. I understand maybe your hopes and dreams. I understand the music you're creating, and I can talk to you in a way that you know that we're a part of a team instead of saying like we're one side making music and another side making music sound good. Mm-hmm. No, basically we're one team together that understands most of the facets. That doesn't mean that I'm fully in practice and can play Rachmaninoff today. I cannot, but I can hold my own very much on jazz or pop playing, etc. And while I don't make my money that way, I think it's a foundation of what I do every day. And I use it for meditation as well, which helps with the work. Like when you get a little bit tight or like your head full of not creative thoughts, it's pretty great to sit down at an instrument and just play, improvise, and kind of remind yourself why you're doing it in the first place. Mm-hmm. Are you a musician?
Yeah, my main instrument is a guitar, yes. but I'm not playing that much anymore. I don't know, I should. And I used to have a piano back when I had a studio, and I remember like all the artists or all the clients when they were late, I sat on the piano and started to play. So that like when you said like meditating, playing the piano, that it really like rang the bell. Or rings the bell.
Yeah, it's important. Mm-hmm. It's important that we're making music. We're not making cookies. Yes, we're making records too. I get it. But like overall, what ties us together is we're making music, and being part of that is important. And I actually would always like, if anybody asks, how do I get better mixes? Let's be very broad, right? Or better productions. I'm like, well, first thing is learn an instrument. Second would be learn some music theory. And I don't mean like you have to know whatever a dominant 7 flat 13 chord is. You don't have to do that. It doesn't have to be that crazy, but know what the language is about. Your keys, your signatures, maybe be able to read, even though not at a performance level, but go like, hey, that's a D. That's a C sharp, et cetera, and be able to do that. I'm not saying you have to, but people ask me, what is a shortcut? Well, there's a shortcut for you.
Yeah, and that is one of the main goals for this podcast, because I think people nowadays, they're too focused on like a mix or making a mix sound good, and they're focused on the plugins and sounds instead of the emotions. So I want to go back to emotions. I don't. When I'm mixing, it's not that I don't care about sound, but I care more about emotions. That's what I try to do, at least. So My second question here is, how do you stay focused when you get sessions with way too many tracks?
It's a good question too. I was joking recently to my assistant. I was like, "Listen, if it has less than 200 tracks, is it even a song yet?" Because we seem to be getting a lot of those, and they're all on deadlines, which is the funny part. Like you get it to something dumped on you in the most beautiful way. Thank you very much. Thank you for sending me music. Thank you for letting me make music. I'm not complaining, right? But it's funny. Like you will have drums and bass and guitars and orchestra, and on top of that horns, and on top of that vocals, and on top of that, and you got man, and now my gig is to put this into 2 speakers, or if I'm lucky enough 2, and then into 14 speakers with the Atmos, right? But the interesting part, this is a theory of mine, okay? It's a little controversial. I always think there is actually not a song that you can't describe in, let's say, 48 tracks. Right? Everything above that is something different. It's not actually tracks anymore. Above that, it's like a multi-mic'd guitar, 3 mics on guitar, but maybe it's really only one part, right? Or whatever, an orchestra with 20 mics or whatever. But overall, musically speaking, it's only, well, in an orchestra would be about 4 to 6 or 7 parts, like it depends, like string, if we're talking strings, sorry, if there's more. But I'm trying to say is like the musical idea should be fitting into 48 tracks, I feel. And everything else is either, it could be a double, like a pad, and then there's another pad and another pad, and really there are only 1 pad that just has 3 parts of the sound. So I try to look at the multi-track in a way. It's like, what are the actual musical ideas here? Is it, and when you look at it like that, it becomes really, really much less. The 40 background vocals are really just 2 parts, like in call it and answer, where maybe there's 8 parts, okay, because then maybe you want the 4 parts harmony and another 4-part harmony that slightly overlaps. I get it, of course, musically speaking, that is possible, but it's not 40 tracks. It's basically 8, right, at best. So you get what I'm saying? So I'm trying to have, for instance, my assistant will whittle that down, go like, okay, so, all the acoustic guitars that have multi-mics will get grouped. If they already doubled, like let's say they're doubled with multi-mics, now you had 6 tracks before, and now you have 1 stereo track afterwards. It's not, and it's a little bit of a premix, as in like levels get decided. But on the other hand, because we're mostly in DAW format, like, I mean, I work in Pro Tools, but I can receive Logic and I can receive Ableton and Studio One just to be compatible with my clients. I mean, unless they totally messed it up, I do honor their blend of, let's say, these multi-mic acoustic guitars. I don't reinvent that. I might take a quick look, like, is there anything particularly wrong with that? But very often that blend makes it into the final mix. So it's not like somebody else was mixing it before I'm mixing. It's not like that. It's just more like a household thing of like, okay, so how do we get this into a smaller place? And I think the idea for all of this I had from probably Chris Lord-Alge and Tom Lord-Alge, because they used to use the Dash machines, the Sony 3348, which is a digital machine, right? And they did explain it really cool. They were like saying, well, we basically only have 44 tracks, 44 plus 2 for the print of the mix that they're doing, plus 2 of the rough mix so they can slave it along, right? And I was like, oh, so basically every mix had to fit into the 44 tracks before they even started. And I took quite some pointers and I'm like, oh, okay, so that's a good thing. Now, I don't need to bounce it down. I'm not going to create a Pro Tools session and then bounce new stems because, well, now Pro Tools has 2,000 voices or something, like basically unlimited tracks, and my computer can handle it too. So we just sort it, we folder some stuff, or at least subgroup them, and just take it down. But musically speaking, going back to what you said about the emotion, the music is there. It has been created this way. It doesn't even matter how I feel about it, if I think that's too much or too little. That's the gig, right? Our gig is not to rewrite the song. It's to present the song in the most emotional and impactful way. And if there's something that we don't agree with, like fully don't agree with, especially an arrangement thing, maybe we will ask back and go like, hey, do you really need this extra guitar part? But it doesn't happen that often because the people, at least the people I deal with, but then, it's just in general, producers and musicians are actually very good at blends. I always try to tell that to both my clients, but other producers. I'm like, don't be afraid of your powers. Musicians can tell you this is too loud, or a producer can say this is too bassy. That's easy. That's not hard. That's not the hard part of mixing, right? So it's very unlikely that they will send you something where everything's just a mess. It doesn't really happen that way, especially now, because the big difference between a DAW and what used to be tape for me is that you save the volume information. Like there's the obviously the faders there, right? With tape, you had to put it on a board, put up the faders, make a rough mix every time you return to the project. On a DAW, you basically build the blends as you go, and the fader positions are saved. So at the moment that they can hand it off to me, it's already mixed, right? And when I say it's already mixed, always I say it like this: the musical intention is probably fully there. It sounds like music. It's not going to sound crazy. It's not going to sound like the vocal is 10 dB too loud. And what is this guitar part doing over here? Because the musician and producer, or the same person, and the artist, they work on that already while they record it. It would be silly to like start over from that. So I say always, it's my hand motion. I apparently make it out a lot, but I do. When they send me a rough mix, it sounds like this. It's music. It's a little tight. It's probably a little bit cluttered. It's probably not as open. It's probably not as energetic as it could be, but there are exceptions on that. But it sounds like music. And so my gig is to take their rough mix, and make it sound like this. Like expand it both in size and emotion, hopefully, maybe in beauty, maybe in audio fidelity. Those are all things that are important. But I can't take their mix and all of a sudden come up with something like this, like totally crooked. If I do that, like if I basically do my thing, do something different or whatever, or do whatever you feel is right, the answer would most of the time be like, what happened to this song? Not because I'm not good at it, but because we all see music in a specific way, and the producer, musician, or artist, they're trying to show you what they think this should be with their rough mix. So my job is not to reinvent it most of the time. Like maybe once every 30 mixes, one person says, hey man, I really don't know where I'm in with this. Can you save me? But it really happens very, very seldomly. So we go from the rough mix to the stereo, wider, and then from the stereo to the Atmos, even wider. But it still has to musically be whatever they had here.
What do you think is the number one mistake engineers with less experience make that causes their mixes to sound lifeless and flat?
I would say there's two number one mistakes. One, your monitoring is not good enough, and you're trusting it somehow. So you're basically mixing into what I call a dirty canvas. Like you're trying to make a painting, but your canvas is not white. It is dirty and bent. And you're trying to paint with your best intentions, like your best musical knowledge that I was just talking about, your best blends. You're mixing it into a canvas that's not neutral, which means it gets, even though it sounds good to you, because you're making all the right decisions, like musically speaking, this is too loud, this is too soft. It doesn't come out like that because your room doesn't translate. Now, what do we take from there is like, either you have to be more careful, and that's where car checks come in, and other studios, and 3 different kind of monitors and headphones, etc., or you improve your listening experience, which comes with investments of money, right? But on the other hand, we can either invest time or money, and hopefully just a little bit of both. But the less you fix your problem, the more time you will spend working around that problem. So that's the biggest thing. And connected to that maybe is trying to fix problems that your monitoring creates for you at the same time. And that's something that I talk to people a lot about bass and the bottom end, right? So I get asked a lot, especially like master classes do for SAE or Berkeley, or there's the CMA, which is in China. They ask me like, how do you get a tight, big, even low end, right? And because everybody seems to be scared, like low end seems to be hard, is what people think, right? And I say, I actually think the actual mixing of the low end is super, super easy. Because there's not many things you're going to do. You might volume right it a little bit, I hope. Well, in lieu of that, you might compress the bass too much, but okay, whatever you want. But you're trying to get the bass a little bit more even. And you choose an overall level and maybe an EQ, but think about it, there is really not that much happening in the low end of a record. Actually, if it is somewhat well designed, there's a kick drum, hopefully one, sometimes more, as you know, and there's a bass, sometimes more. Okay, but most of the other instruments don't reach down into the very low end, so they should not be there, so to speak. Right. So part of the mixing of the record is cleaning up the crud from other instruments reaching into the low end, so to speak. But when they asked me, so how do I get the good bass? I was like, the problem is not your technique of mixing the bass. The problem is that you can't hear the bass. Like in your studio, it's most likely, unless you spend considerable amount of resources and time, etc., your low end is not flat. This room is flat down to 25 hertz. So it's really easy. If I put up a fader, I hear if there's a wolf note. I don't know if you guys know what that is. A wolf note, for instance, is on a cello. Like you play a scale down into the low end, and one or two notes will reach out very, very loud in amplitude, and that's normally part of the instrument. The instrument itself is maybe not fully balanced, so to speak. So even though the player is actually playing the same thing, the wolf note reaches out as a frequency that resonates a lot. And some players accommodate for that or know where that is, and some don't, etc. It will be recorded, but in my situation, I just hear it, and I can counteract it with a very small EQ move, which means also I cannot tell you what to do. I cannot tell you 60 hertz needs boosting because I haven't heard the bass, right? But it's very easy for me because I hear the bass. Hear what needs fixing. Now, one of the biggest mistakes or hardest thing to wrap your mind around is if your room is compromised in sound, especially in the low end, and you just mix into that and you make actual decisions. Like, for instance, you program a 808, but your room is off. So now if you're actually changing the velocities of the 808, or maybe put multiband compression on it, or EQ single notes in order to hear a very cool low end, which is already tainted by the low end in your room because you can't hear it correctly, you're actually making stuff worse. You're actually making decisions into a medium that's not there, so to speak. So people actually are a little bit confused, or they're like, really? When I say, if you know already that your room doesn't sound good in the bass, I feel that you have a better chance to come out with a even big bass, whatever, if you do nothing. Because most likely the programming, like the samples, are probably pretty evenly laid into your sampler, or if you're mixing, the producer hopefully didn't mess it all up. You can see it sometimes on the waveform how far off it is. But literally, if there was an 808 and had velocities that are straight and the sample is normal, then the waveform should already be even, which means if you just choose a level, hey, I need this much bass or this much bass, you should be in okay shape. if you don't touch it, if you now start EQing it, you will destroy that bass line in relation to each other, to the next note, you know. So the wisdom to go like, well, I know my studio is not great, so maybe I should just ignore the bottom for now instead of trying to fix around it. I think that's one of the bigger issues with translation and actually, you know, messing up a mix, because you can easily introduce muddiness or just weight that is really not there, or the or the opposite, like it's too thin because your room is resonant, etc. But had you just not touched the bass, it would be a better outcome. So yeah, that would be it.
And do you think it's possible mixing with headphones?
Yes, absolutely. And actually, it's something that comes up from time to time. And obviously, I have my own travels with that. Currently, I'm using these guys here, the Neumann NDH30s, which sound really good. I used beforehand the Biodynamic 727. Oh my God, I don't know the number anymore. It was only like a year ago, and I really liked them. But Neumann brought these to me and for me to check out, and they're just super musical, very bass extended. This is an open back headphone. There's also an NDH20, which is a different sound, but I preferred this one. I think this works really well. Vocal leveling is beautiful. Checking your reverbs on it is beautiful. That's something actually that can also be hard in an untreated or not optimally treated room, is like how much reverb is there actually in the track, even though I put some on. So, and to answer the headphone question in general, so, well, obviously the very obvious part is like everybody's listening on headphones right now. Actually, when I was young, every self-respecting person had a stereo system that had two speakers and probably some kind of component, something, and you would brag how good your stuff, how good your stereo would sound. And I'm talking about not professionals, just people. You know, I have a cool stereo, and now I feel, and I could be proven wrong, but I feel like almost no one even has speakers anymore. Like they do listen to TVs and maybe sound bars and phones and phone headphones, but do many people actually have speakers that are not musicians? I mean, basically the consuming part of our music and our output? I don't think so. So now, does that mean we need to mix on headphones to translate to headphones? No, of course not. But it does mean that it's not unreasonable to say, well, maybe I can get good balances that matter on more devices on headphones, you know. And if you really look at it, it's all just a matter of getting used to a setup. Like it's all like, basically it's also a little bit odd to say I definitely need speakers in this questionably treated room, these kind of speakers, to make it sound fantastic on all of the headphones around the world, right? That's also a weird statement, right? So in a way, it's only for you personally. Did you grow up with mixing on headphones? Well, mixing on speakers. Well, then you probably won't be that happy with headphones. But if you started today and that's all you ever did, I don't think you would come out with terrible mixes. I think you make different decisions. Like panning decisions are very different in headphones. I feel, and there's some software that helps. One's called Can Opener, and I don't know who makes it. I actually do know who makes it, but I can't think of the name right now. And and then there's obviously the VSX, the Slate one, Slate, and then Waze makes something like that too, like a impulse response thing for headphones. And they're all good. Like I really think all of these are really great solutions, and I don't think one of them is right or wrong. But because you could also say, let's say the Can Opener, which changes the panning in the headphones, because basically normally on the headphones you get sound directly on the ears. When you actually sit in front of the speakers, it doesn't come from here. Otherwise, you're sitting too close to the speaker. But it more comes from here, from the front, kind of a little bit narrower. So it does that, and it's sometimes, and also mixes a little bit of the sound from the left channel into the right channel to like give you that idea that stuff is leaking into the other ear like it would on a speaker,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that helps. That helps some. I personally didn't. I mean, I tried it and I was like, okay, I get what you're trying to do, but that's not what I want to do. Also, there's this thought. Let's say I make all these decisions on headphones, but with these extra helpful plugins in the middle, the actual the actual listening audience doesn't have those. So for them, whatever I come up with goes back straight into the ear. So shouldn't I maybe mix in that same scenario? I mean, you could, and this is a theoretical approach that I don't do, but you could declare that maybe Apple AirPods, maybe not AirPods, maybe whatever their cheaper version of that is. I don't actually know. Whatever comes with a phone, I don't know. But there are some headphones like the AirPods that is
Mm-hmm.
probably the most common headphones on planet Earth. I don't know if it's the Apple, but there's probably the information. So arguably you could say, well, get yourself those headphones and start mixing on those. You have the best translation to most systems in the world. Right? I mean, I won't do that because I actually think that it won't create great sounding music, even though it might be better translating music to most systems. So to answer the question, I think it's a matter of practice. There's no you can't. I would say somebody who's starting now or started in the last few years would go like, why would I use speakers? That's also dumb. Like nobody's listening to speakers.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever works for you. Yes, possible.
Cool. Going back to the low end, do you like using sidechain with the kick and bass?
Yes and no. To me, there's two sidechains, two important sidechains. One is that EDM sidechains that gives you the offbeat rhythm, mostly triggered from the kick drum, that goes through the entire arrangement, right? To me, that is not a mixing tool. That is a production and music tool. And there's no like, I like that or I don't like. That's part of the style, like the sucking effect is something that, well, now the track sounds like it's supposed to some people. Mm-hmm. But that's a production thing. And actually, if the song needs that, then it should be baked into the stems that are being sent to me. Because it's a rhythmic production music situation. It's not a mixing trick. I hate the word mixing trick. I think there's almost no mixing tricks. There's there's techniques, things we do, just like. But I also let's say I want to hang up a picture, and I get a nail and a hammer, and I put the hammer into the wall. That's not a hanging trick. That's just what we do. I don't know. It's a funny word for me. There's no secret. Like, the fader, when you push it away from you, stuff gets louder. There's no trick. Anyway, so on the sidechain thing, I really dislike when people say something along like, oh, I always kick the sidechain, my bass to the kick drum or the other way around or whatever you want. I'm like, that's not good information. It's like, does it need that? Mm-hmm. Is it true that maybe this bass is covering the kick, so we want to duck it every time that the kick hits? I don't know. Maybe. So it is a technique to solve that problem, but it's not a go-to every single time I mix a song. And then how deep is it? Like once you go very deep with that, like once you move a part out of the way by, let's say, 6, 7, 8 dB, you're changing the musical impact, the musical intention of that part. Mm-hmm. So all of a sudden, outside of, is it a good idea mixing wise, it's also, is it a good idea music wise? I don't know. That maybe you just stumbled on the best thing that ever happened, or it sounds totally terrible. That's why I'm not saying I use it all the time. So I do, most of the time, I find that sidechaining is not necessary. Some of the time I use it. And then there's one other thing that I would say I never use it unless a producer specifically asks me, which is that you sidechain let's say the main keyboards, like the middle of the record, like keyboards and guitars, the like maybe a subgroup of that, you sidechain it to the vocal so that the vocal sits on top of it, or is always it's always cutting through that part of the arrangement. I try to never do that. I mean, it's like that sounds to me like you're not done mixing yet. There's an EQ version of this where that works. There's a way where you write the vocal where that works. Now, if all fails, I will do it. Yes, I know about this technique, but it's not like, okay, so here's the song. Let's start with sideshining all the keyboards. I'm just not doing that. No.
And what would you say are the characteristics that make or makes a mix feel alive and engaging?
I mean, the answer to that question is I think dynamics first and ambience is second. I mean, assuming that the arrangement is working. Actually, let's go there for a second because that is very much connected. I wish, and this is the downside of. Remember when I was talking about the DAW versus the tape, right? So the upside of the DAW is you always have the last rough, the last blend, and you keep on working. You're adding stuff, maybe you subtracting something, hopefully, too, here and there. But like you're working on the last balance that you have. That's great. That's a super advantage. It's amazing. The one thing it takes away from you is, well, if you had it on tape and a board, and well, you don't need that. But if you approach it that way, you would have to make a rough mix every time before the session. The advantage here is that you actually explored the song 10 times. You have 10 rough mixes that are slightly different with probably an ever-growing arrangement because you're making changes every time you do. But the cool part is that all of a sudden you go like, well, even though rough mix number 3 was not complete music-wise, maybe there was no vocal on there. Well, we did something really cool there with the guitars that was louder or softer or what have you, and more impactful that we lost by rough mix 10. So I wish, and it never happens, but I think if any producers are listening, I think it's a cool idea. Just before, like you decide we're ready for mixing, and if that's you or somebody else, fine, doesn't matter. Take 5 minutes, just take every fader down to 0, or minus infinity actually. And quickly, like spend 5 minutes, or maybe the length of the songs times 2 or 3, like just cycle it, and put up a new mix with the faders, and just see, do I actually need all these elements? Does this still work? And if you go in 5 to 10 minutes, like, of course, it's not sounding like a mix, as in like finished or anything like that. But if the musical idea and the intensity of the music is being portrayed just by fader, not by compression, not by anything else, I think then you're ready to mix. And if you come to that point and you're like, well, there's all these guitars that were slightly too low that actually no one needs, and you notice it only in those 5 minutes, that's a good 5 minutes spent, and also you go like, if you do that and you go like, okay, that doesn't work, spend another 5 minutes, try something else. Still doesn't work. Still doesn't feel emotionally powerful. Then maybe you're not done. Maybe you're not ready with the arrangement to actually mix the song. So that being said, the music has to be there. The arrangement has to work without much mixing. Otherwise, you're just trying to fix something that's not there, or inject energy into something that doesn't have any. That doesn't work in most cases. That's just like, it doesn't get there all the way. It helps if there's energy and the mixing injects more energy. Well, that's awesome. Then you come to something super powerful. But if there's none to begin with, or it's just dragging, or sorry, I don't want to put it in musical terms because it could be a really up-tempo song, right? But if it's just not work, it doesn't feel like anything, then the mix won't help it. It will be a better sounding thing, but it's probably not all that it is, So dynamics. Actually, just yesterday I got a note. Hey, the whole verse has to be turned down, not just the vocal, the whole thing, so that the jump into the chorus is more more powerful, which makes a lot of sense, of course. I call it the swoosh. It's like music goes like, right? So if that has to be powerful, and some clients fully react to that. Oh, I love how big the chorus is now, and some of them go like, well, I see what you're doing, but now the verse feels too soft. And that's one of those things where you can't get it right. You can get it right for yourself, and hopefully you get it right for the client, but there's no right answer. Some people want it more linearly, yeah, and some want it more dynamic. But the dynamic part will make it sound more alive, and the cost is it's going to be a little softer. And if you like that, that's great. If you don't like that, that's great. Like it's two ways to get there. And the other thing I was saying was the effects / ambiences. And I just did a masterclass on reverb with Sonic Scoop, and I set this in there too. What I think is important to realize is what we can do as mixers. So what we can't is change the arrangement. I mean, unless asked to, I suppose, but that's not the gig to begin with. But what we can is we can subtract and add. And like by subtract, I mean carve out EQ or turn something down. By add, I mean, for instance, add compression, EQ, or, which is my point right now, add reverb and ambiences. It's one of the only things that we can add to a record that is basically not only required, but also asked for. Like nobody's going to appreciate me adding a piano part, even though I'm a good piano player. But they all appreciate some spacious presentation of the music. And what it does to me, to my ears, what ambiences do, and the contrast between drier things and wetter things, is that creates the excitement, non-flatness, expensiveness, which is it's not a great word because, for instance, if you want to have a garage band kind of sound, you don't want an expensive sound. It's not a good thing necessarily, but in an intentional way to excite the record, excite the room. Then, when there's a stop, something hangs out, right? There's beauty that our ears, that our brains have learned over the years, where like, if there's some reverb, then there's more happening, for lack of a better word. So some energy can come from that.
And how does automation play a role in keeping a mix dynamic and engaging?
I mean, the same, in the same way. Like so if we're all talking about being musicians or knowing how a musician operates, right? Imagine the orchestra, right? And the orchestra has normally a conductor at the front who's like the band leader, so to speak. And it's on the surface of it, you go like, why do I need this conductor, right? Like, I mean, everybody's looking into their music. They know what the next note is and when to play it, roughly. Sure, it helps to have somebody with a baton, but roughly speaking, they all know when to play what. But what's really great, if you actually watch a conductor, what they do is like they do their conducting and they point at sections. Basically, now it's your turn. But the funny part is, of course, that section knows it's their turn. Like it's weird that they have to point. But I think what their job is, and this is what my job is as a mixer, is like I'm highlighting for a moment who we should listen to. And so that's where automation comes in. My automation is basically my baton. I'm like, okay, so maybe I'll push the beginning of the brass section up by like a dB or two, even though the music part of it is not supposed to be louder, but I'm trying to tell your ear, hey, here's the cool thing you need to listen to now. And then I move it out of the way because maybe now the answer vocal comes in. So my job the whole time through is to keep people, and not so much entertained, yeah, that's the final outcome, but to keep them engaged with the music by creating dynamics that weren't there, by showing the ear what to listen to, what is important at this very moment. Is it the snare fill? Is it the vocal? It's not always the vocal. I mean, sure, the very short answer is the song only matters if you hear the vocal. True, fully true. But at the very micro level, that is not true. I can also say, like, I can create the feeling of let's say, anger or stress by having the vocal be too soft in a section. Because you're like, why can't I hear it? And that's even though you're not supposed to say that in your mind, but you feel the stress of the music fighting against the vocal, and maybe that works for the song because it is an angry song. I mean, it's just an idea, right? So basically, the automation is me being the conductor of the mix. And I want to say one caveat with that is there have been people in my past who basically said like there should be no automation, like the parts are played as intended, and I can respect that. I can respect that attitude, so to speak, but it doesn't mean that they're right. It just means like before, it's right for you. Yes, sir. No automation on this mix. You got it. That's the beauty of what we're doing. We're doing creative things. We're not fixing toilets. Nothing against people who fix toilets.
And at what point in the mix do you start automating?
Because I'm on a DAW and now I don't have any faders anymore. I used to have faders in my last room. I do it almost immediately when I see it. Like I try to dive into the mix, and like we were talking about before, we have a balance already. We have a rough mix that is not too far away from what the musical event should be, right? So basically I start wherever the rough mix was left off. I can very clearly see how far I'm changing it from the rough mix levels. And actually I tell myself, if I see a fader that's like 6 dB away from the rough mix, I literally ask myself, Richard, are you sure? Like, do you really want to turn this up 6 dB away from the rough mix? Did they get it that wrong? It's a good quality check for yourself. Sometimes the answer is like, maybe not, that was too far. Anyway, but because I can do that, I kind of like, I don't have to spend that much time recreating balance, which means I can start by basically like putting in little events, like for instance, pushing up the beginning of the chorus. So I might already automate at the beginning. And Pro Tools has this really, really cool thing. And I don't know, I mean, I'm sure some other DAWs have it too, but not all of them. It has trim automation, right? And I use a mode that's called trim read, which actually is not an automation mode because you actually can't make a move with trim read, but it means that I can make writes on my vocal track or my guitar track for that matter, but I still have this trim fader which sits at 0 and is yellow in my case, and I can use the trim fader to say, okay, the whole guitar is too loud or too soft, but the writes on the track actually don't affect that. I mean, sorry, they move with it. So I have 2 lines of automation there, and it's very beautiful. It's almost like you automate something in Pro Tools and move a fader on the console, and they're not connected. That's how I do it. But because it's all there right now, and you're constantly basically working on parts anyway, like automating something is as quick as whatever, putting a fade in or an edit or something. It's not that different anymore. It was harder on the consoles.
What are your thoughts on the use of saturation and harmonic distortion to add warmth and character to a mix?
My favorite topic. No, not really.
No,
the funny. No.
It's one of my favorites, actually.
It is. And I would love your answer on that too, but I'll try mine. Similarly to the sidechain, right? I do not think that harmonics and saturation. Well, harmonics. Well, every mix has harmonics. Every instrument is already has harmonics built in, and on top of that, I can't control how it was recorded. So let's leave it at that, right? But when we're talking about adding harmonics or like overdrives or decapitators or saturation, etc., I always feel like if your answer would be, I need that to make a professional mix or what have you, or add warmth, or every mix needs it, I think that's totally wrong. That's weird. There are instruments that I can wake up, excite a little bit. For instance, when I pop in, for instance, some parallel parallel saturation or distortion, and that's just, it creates frequencies that weren't there, yay, and something that I can't add with EQ because you can only EQ what's there. So that's very helpful. Yeah, so I can use it to pop out an instrument or even a vocal, though I'm going to talk about the vocal in a moment. But overall speaking, I don't use hardly any plugins as saturators on a full mix or on a subgroup or by default. I feel it's wrong, and like, again, I have to listen. Does it need it or not? The warmth that I might be looking for can very often be created by level or by EQ, like by the actual blend. I tell people all the time, to me, everything is volume. A fader is volume of the instrument. EQ is volume at a frequency. Compressor is volume that's either too loud or too soft and has to be created. It has to be evened out. Or a multiband EQ is the same, like a volume at different frequency that happens to dance around a threshold. So the entire mix is about volume. So can't I create a musical event, a musically harmonically rich emotional event from just a fader level and slight EQ? I should be able to. So if that's the answer, I shouldn't have to saturate every single thing. And so that when we go further, because I see this on Instagram a lot, the tips like for the perfect vocal chain, and they will have the usual stuff: low cuts, reverb, compression, blah blah, and then the saturator. And most of the time, they put it somewhere in the middle, like somewhere after cleaning up with a surgical EQ and before adding with a colored EQ, which is a whole other story, which I think is kind of hilarious. But anyway, so there will be a saturator in there, and I'm like, I never do that. Like, there's never a saturation or harmonics plugins on my vocal unless I want the vocal to be distorted. You know, like, because I don't know if you've tried this, but let's say you take the decapitator, which is a good one. You set it on the E setting. Little trick, no, not trick, but like that's what I like. Because E is like feels a little leaner. The next three a little darker, and the A1 is kind of a little bit more neutral. But the E feels like it has maybe the high end is a little pushed. It feels lean. It's a good thing for vocals to me. But let's say then you take the left knob and turn it all the way to 10. Obviously, it's now hella distorted. We don't want that. And then take the mix knob down until you hear just a little bit. Now, even at the lowest settings, I just hear a distorted vocal now, which in most of the cases, I don't like. Now, try the other thing. Turn up the decapitator on the left to, like, let's say 3, not all the way, and leave the mix up either all the way or just a little bit. I still hear it. Like, basically, I come away with, this vocal is distorted. Why would I want that? That's just dumb. Sorry. And the answer is, of course, as with everything, if this vocal should be distorted, that's a fantastic technique. And if you think that's part of what a mix needs to be professional or done, or you definitely have to use some saturation, I think you're completely wrong. So, but while I have you here, what is your thought on that? Because I would love to talk to people who use saturation. I'm like, what are you thinking about? Because I don't know. I'm not saying I'm right. This is my approach. Obviously, people saturate stuff all over the place.
I love using the decapitator on toms. When the toms, they're too dull, I don't know, something is missing. I love using that on punish. And then I blend it with a mix knob. And then for me, it's like how a tom should sound, not by itself, but in the mix. It's like those. I remember I first used that when a band, like their reference was Beck. One of those, I can remember the name of the album, but I had those really saturated toms, and I used that, and I love that. And the other thing I use is saturation on vocals, but it's I use Saturn 2, but just on the I don't know, mid frequencies. But it's sometimes just maybe 1 out of 10 songs I mix.
I need that preset. Because I no, just because I play around with all of these, right? Saturn being one. I like the SPL twin tube.
Mm-hmm.
That one I actually use a lot for instruments. A decapitator. I have used like some tape plugins and just tried to like just push them a lot and see what happens. Um, yeah, I'm just trying to figure out. Short of, I really want a special effect. Like, why would I do that?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't really have the full answer on it. But yeah, the bottom line is I don't think you need that. You can use that, but if you think that's the only thing that will make this vocal sound great, I don't think that's correct.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, can we talk about your mix bus? What do you usually
Mm-hmm.
have on your mix bus? And most importantly, what do you use each element, and what does it add to your mix?
Right. Well, I'm a proponent in that you probably don't need much lifting on the mix bus to
Mm-hmm.
begin with, because I think there's always a better there's always a better blend or a better leveling that can solve most of the problems on that you're trying to solve on the mix bus. So I approach it in two ways. One, the entire mix bus has to be there at the beginning, and I mix into clipper and limiter
Mm-hmm.
because it immediately affects the size of the record. There are people who say, well, you shouldn't do that and let mastering do that, blah, 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 blah. But to me, over the years, the record changes too much when you do that, when it comes back. So limiters most of the time make your sounds a little smaller. Like they make the level louder, but the sound actually a little smaller. So I want to be able to push into the limiter and go like, okay, this sounds good. Or now it's pushing against my kick drum or whatever too much. So now the kick drum becomes smaller again, but now I have to push the kick drum. I now still have the opportunity to push the kick differently, or maybe add a little bit more bottom or what have you, to counteract what the limiter just did. But if I never heard that, then basically I'm setting myself up for, well, it's gonna change in mastering, and you're most likely not gonna change. Not gonna like it. So that's the one thing. The other thought is like the plugins I use are plugins that have very good quality, but that are used in the final steps like mastering as well. There used to be a time when literally the mastering engineer had the best gear that you couldn't have or afford. And so there was actually a real point of going, well, I probably shouldn't touch my record too much because they can do it better. And skill aside, of course, they're all very skilled at what they're doing. But I'm also very skilled. I also master when it's necessary. So I'm not afraid of that. But now that we're basically using the same tools in many cases, I'm like, well, why shouldn't I be able to use my limiter? There's nothing wrong with it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I have ears. I have considerable experience, and it doesn't mean I'm not knocking mastering engineers. They're beautiful to have around. I'm just saying they shouldn't stop me, so to speak. So I'm pushing into this layer of dynamic compaction with the limiters that I need to hear, where I clearly can say, okay, that's too much. This record cannot be this loud. Well, I mean, it can, but it clearly is suffering because we're pushing it too loud. I shouldn't be surprised by that at the very end of the process in mastering. So it's mostly that. There's a tiny bit of spreading going on, like just like stereo spreading. That would come from ozone most of the time, and I might have an EQ over there that gives me a little bit of a smiley curve, and that might be different ones. It might be, what do I use? The Chandler, the curve bander is a good one, but also the BX Digital, which is a very straight ahead one. I have used the Mac DSP filter bank for this, and if I need another band, I might just use the Fab Filter Q3, which is currently just like what everybody uses. That was not always the case, but it is a very, very good EQ. Can't wait to check out Q4, which just came out. So just if I had to describe the mix bus, it's like first level, I might have a trim plugin, and because I might be too soft or too loud, I might just push it a little bit. I'd use compression very little. I mean, I do like the Townhouse compressor that Plugin Alliance makes.
Yeah.
They're great. But I use it so little. I mean, you were talking like a dB, and then on top of that, I only use it in parallel. You know,
Wow.
I really feel that unless the actual genre calls for it, for instance, rock mixes are more compressed normally. I don't use much compression on the master bus, but when I use it, it's there from the beginning. So basically the sound gets baked in. And again, if it's too much, I can already see it. There will be a little bit of multi-band compression, but not the way we see it portrayed on the internet a lot, which is like a dancing multi-band compression on all bands. I personally don't like that because it feels it's not like it's cheating, which is a little bit of cheating, but I don't care. You can cheat if that makes you faster. Just cheat. I don't care. Just make a better record. Congratulations, you saved yourself some time. No, but because I don't like this idea that like my mix bus, similar to what I was talking about the monitoring beforehand, if the mix bus should mostly be white and plain and untouched. If it's already like a thing that bumps and goes up and down and pushes at different frequencies, I'm like, how am I supposed to control that in any shape or form? I'm just guessing that that hoping that the multiband compressor or EQ, sorry, is just taking care of my problems. That's very hard for me to understand in my mind. I'm just like, what am I actually doing here? So the multi-band compression that I do mostly is just in the bass. And it's really with a very specific task. And the task is that in most genres, in most records, short of maybe jazz, maybe, we want a solid bass line. That's why it's there. The player played it as even as they could. All the tonics are as even as they could be played. If they're not, then there's an issue with the playing, right? Bass players, give me a call. We'll talk about that if I'm right. But it feels like the function is that we have a bottom that solidifies the record. So that's why I have a multi-band compression on the master for only the bass, because basically it gives me like another 1 dB or 1.5 dB of evening the bass out, because now the bass and the kick could hit together or not together, like things that affect each other, where the solidness of the bass gets out of whack. And so the multi-band compression pushes against that a little bit. But like everything above 300 or so might be totally even. So even though it might be like a 4-band dynamic compressor, multi-band compressor, the upper 3-band might not do anything. You know, they're also not a curve, because I see that sometimes people have. There are some, I'm not going to call it out, but like there are some presets I see all the time where like the multi-band output curve looks like this. Like the higher you go, like +5, +6 dB, and I'm like, no. I mean, good for you, but I don't want that at all. Like, it should be actually flat. It should be unity gain per band in my book. And obviously I'm wrong, because other people do it differently. But that's how I feel about this. And then EQ last, and then limiter very last. But that's basically my my master bus. I mix really loud. Again, depending on genre, I'm definitely at -9 and -8 by the end of the mix, before we're even mastering. And I do print 2 versions, but I do like one with less level, but I don't take stuff off. I push a little less into it, kind of going like, well, the circuitry of these processors is still in the mix, which means whatever they did to the song, short of the actual gain reduction, is still on the lower level version of this mix. And I sent both of them, and I kid you not, like to mastering, I kid you not, about half of the time they used my lower level and half they used my higher level. And I tell them, like, I send you that at full quality because I want you, mastering engineer, choose what you think is the best version of the song that makes you help make a better master. But if I only gave you the lower level and then maybe the MP3 of the higher level, I'm like, now I'm just taking information and sources away from you. I feel actually that's a really wrong approach. There's nothing wrong with the loud one. Very often this was what happens to me. I master with somebody. They master 12 songs, get paid for 12 songs, of course. And they show me their creative input of what they would do with the thing. And then it comes back to me, like I listen to it, and me and the client, it's not me pushing for it, but we will just go like, okay, well, these 6 songs, the mastering engineer did something that's beautiful and awesome. And these other 6, your pre-master, whatever, my final mix was just better. So we'll just keep that. And I tell them all, that's not a waste of time or money. This is exactly what you need. This is a creative exploration. And you like this one and you didn't like that one. It doesn't mean the mastering engineer didn't nail it. It was just like this, look, we like this one. And you're lucky. My mix is so loud and proud and finished that you can just put it out like that. That's fine. Or, and this happens from time to time, it's like they basically, well, we like this. Can you just do the mastering for these other songs? Or like, well, can you now do the mastering for the songs that you actually mixed? And mixing is a single effort. Like I want to optimize the song, right? Mastering, if it's an album or an EP, is a effort where we're putting these songs into a sequence and how they live together. So of course I want to make a small adjustment to make them flow better, maybe together. But it's not because a step was missing or the song didn't sound good. It's just because now they're in a different context. So sometimes I get hired to do that. So I am a mastering engineer officially, and I do master stuff, but my main gig is being a mixer.
So for the multiplier and compressor, are you using the ozone too?
Yes, actually, the ozone is the only thing that does a little bit of the spreading and the multiband compression, but it doesn't. I don't use the limiter on it, though it does sound really good. I just in my workflow, I used to use it more, and I was really happy with it, but now I don't use it anymore. And I don't use EQ in that. I use only the multi-band and the spreader in that. I should probably use the harmonic exciter because then all my records would be hit records. I know, but I'm not.
And what are you using for the clipper and the limiting?
That changes, but I do like K-clip. I do like Gold clip. Those two actually are the most used ones. Gold clip, shout out Ryan Schwab, really good guy, really good mastering engineer too. And for the limiting that's at the very end, I like a few, and it's odd. I think my number one go-to would be the Stealth limiter by IK Multimedia, which is great. And I do like a very old Pro Tools limiter called the Massey L2007, I think.
Yeah,
and I know that's not available for all DAWs, but it's a great one. There are some moments when the Stealth. So what I like about the Stealth limiter, it's really punchy. Like it does retain transients surprisingly well, like excellently. And every now and then it does this thing where like the whole song is great, but then in the second verse there's this one thing that hits it and it actually distorts. And you're like, but wait a second, in my chorus that's louder and it seems to not be distorting, or maybe you don't hear it because there's more stuff going on. I don't know. So when that happens, I go to the 2007 because it's a tiny compromise because you get a tiny bit less of the attack. And a tiny bit, but it's a tiny bit cleaner. It's like that. I have automated limiters on songs before, where like I was really happy with the whole thing, and then there were like 2 places where I'm like, why is this crapping out over here? And I just automated on the master into a different limiter for that moment, and it works. In the end, that's what you do. There's a really cool story, which I don't know the full truth of. Just the outcome, so to speak. You remember that song "Black or White" by Michael Jackson, right?
Yeah.
that was mixed on two different consoles and then spliced together.
Uh-huh.
The super nerdy answer would be, oh, we chose the consoles for the verses and the whatever. What I actually think is happened is that they somehow like the one mix better for other reasons. Not it just happened to be on a different board, and then they spliced it together, which is a cool solution to the problem. But that's where I kind of got the idea. I was like, why do I need to only use one limiter if it doesn't work for the whole song?
Sure.
And that's what I did.
I have a couple of questions from the
Yeah.
audience. The first one is, do you remember the vocal chain you used when mixing for Prince? Can you tell us about that experience?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, so first of all, there was obviously the recording of it, right? So he had a C12 AKG C12, and we used just the board pre's because that was set up. Yeah, we just used the board pre's of an SSL 8000. That's an 8000, which is basically a 4000 with more buses at Paisley Park Studio A, and he had an LA2A set up there. That was really not my choice. It was just there, and basically the way he did it, as many people know now, he basically had it coming on whatever channel 24 in the board, and then the bus matrix was all pressed to all 24 tracks, so he could actually do. He used the analog tape to record his own vocals, and just was able to like on the fly change the tracks and whatever. He didn't need an engineer for that. It's totally funny. I worked with him for a little bit more over a year or so. I recorded vocals for him personally only one time. One time when he's like, I need this background stack on on this, and so he jumped on the nearest mic, more to speak. But like he does it all basically. It was actually very, very thoughtful. Paisley Park has an engineer's lounge. So basically where he says, okay, I'm going to do the vocal on this song. Like all you do is like you set everything for him up and make sure it works. And then basically you sit in the lounge that is only for you as an engineer to wait for him to be done. But on the mixing side, it was very, very minimal because he is like that. He's very... He didn't really appreciate so much any like trickery in that kind of way. Like parallel processing, for instance, it's like, why are you doing that? Like he would say stuff like that, there should be a kick drum and nothing else. The end. I'm like, okay. So even though I don't 100% remember, I can it wouldn't have been much more complicated than an R compressor. And at the time, like one of those, because he liked the API, right? He has in the Studio B and also at Sunset Sound too, there was a DeMedio API console. So he liked that sound. So I was like, well, let's make this kind of familiar to him, because he doesn't, at the time he just gets, I was probably not the first record we did in Pro Tools with him, but he kind of acted like he's never seen it, which is also not true, of course, but he had his ways. But there was a plugin at the time called the A series by URS plugins. We were one of the first ones who emulated Neve and API plugins, and they're not in business anymore. They did really well though. And so I did that mostly so he would see a GUI that looked familiar to him, because it looked like an API EQ. And so that actually was, in hindsight, a pretty good move on my part, because he's like, oh, just one more click of the API. I'm like, oh, yeah, cool, because it's stepped, right? Actually, the plugin was not stepped. You could choose to go in between. But it was really, really... There was no saturation plugin, can tell you that. But that being said, he absolutely hammered the LA2A on the way in. And because it was a setup that he had started beforehand, and because I was not in the room, I couldn't really have too much input going like, hey, I think you're hitting that a little hard, right? But so here, that being said, between the LA2A and the Studer 827 tape machine, I'm sure there was some saturation, sorry, some harmonica in there, right? It's just not what I would
Hmm.
call. That's like using gear. But we also didn't push the tape level very hard or anything like that. No, just regular recording to a very quiet tape machine.
Hmm.
So yeah, that would be that.
Do you remember any effects, delay, reverbs, or something?
At the time, this would have been. As I say in this reverb masterclass, I am a huge proponent of plates on vocals. They just seem cleaner to me, and they're splashy, and they're almost like synthesizers, like subtractive synths, where you have a lot of frequencies, and then you take a filter to take it down. While halls, this is a very, very random and rough descriptions. To me, they seem like darker and woolier always. Um, so it would have been a plate, and the funny part is Paisley Park actually had two plates, but we never used them because we mixed the songs in the computer, which is something he wanted to do. Um, it's like I was like, let's go mix on the SSL, and he's just basically never wanted to do it. Not because he's against it. Obviously, it's his board, and he has done record before and after with that. It was more like he was. I think at that time he really wanted to like see what this digital recording do for us. You know, this is the Lotus Flower and MPL Sound records, by the way, in case you guys wonder. This is 2009, I think. So the answer to that, it would have been a plugin, and at the time I would have used the Avid plugins, Revives. Revives would be my first. And the delays, I'm super basic on delays. It's either the Mod 3 delays, and I would then, if I wanted to put like a Sansamp beforehand or afterwards, like dirty it up a little bit. Or if they already had the H delay, I would probably use the H delay. It is funny, and I hope plugin companies are not crucifying me for it. But like, as far as delays go, I think we're there. We have. Oh, sorry. Not Amp Farm, but Delay Farm or Echo Farm.
Echo
That would
Farm,
have
yeah.
been one of them too. But like, I think today you can almost solve any problem with the Echo Boy. I mean, any delay that you can think of, they can pretty much make. And the H delay is the easiest one to do ping pong. That's what I really think. But I always think about that on the H delay, turn off the analog stuff because it hisses like nobody's business. But I have not heard many delays where I'm like, oh, that's a new delay. I mean, like always think in your mind too that sounds that a processor design makes is basically only what you have in your head, unless you use presets. But the problem with presets, most of the time, it will say something like, whatever, Northern Light Shimmer, and you go like, what the hell is that? Like I will never use a preset for that. Like I make my own stuff. Like, because by the third click on something, you already don't know anymore what's going on. And then what? You're guessing, hoping that you arrive at a random sound that you hopefully like. So like, to me, presets have to be always labeled like something like this: dotted quarter, modulation, short tail, boom. I don't want to have any weird name next to that. I can't use it. I won't use it. You know. So, and then if it's special in a way, like then write dark, or like brittle at the end, or something that's descriptive, where I can actually go, oh, I see what changes here. But so yeah, that would be it. It would be very basic Pro Tools Pro Tools plugins at that time.
Great. The second question here is, how do you get the clarity and the high end in your mixes?
Well, thank you. I don't know. I mean, the very quick answer is I hear it and I counteract what's wrong, right? A little bit more complicated, and maybe a little bit of a feedback that I see also, and I'm confused by it. Next to the saturation, I'm a little concerned about the whole saturation part, right? As you can tell. But the other thing that I see online, and I'm like, I'm so confused. And by the way, when I say these things, I don't mean people do it wrong. I'm literally like, why would they do that? So anyway, what I see is people using high cuts on like vocals, like at like 16 kilohertz and stuff. And I'm like, why? Like, I would never do that. Like, I think I think I could almost say for the last 1,000 mixes, I have never used a high cut on anything ever. The only reason I would use one is like if there's very clearly a hiss at the top, but there's no musical information anymore. So it's maybe easier to high cut it than using a noise reduction plugin. Plus, sometimes you don't get the noise print because there's not enough space between the actual usable stuff and the hiss. So I might fix that with that. Okay, but otherwise, I'm like, I've seen vocal chains, like there's a high cut on the vocals, and I don't get it. The whole point is to, like you said, have an open mix. We want to counteract aliasing frequencies, etc. Like we're trying to get actually as much high frequencies into our converters as we can, right? And somehow some people decide to put low cuts on the top, and I'm like, but why would you do that? Now there's one way that it used to be a way where that made sense, where you can bend a high shelf with a low cut. Like for instance, you push 10 kilohertz with a high shelf, and then you go like, but at the very end, very top, it gets a little bit too bright. So now you low cut it, so you get like this curve. That makes sense. Totally fair. Get it. But with digital technology, we can basically make any freaking shape we want up there, so we don't need to do that trick anymore. So it's confusing to me. It's confusing when I see high cuts. I'm like, this is weird. This is the opposite. So similar to my bass thing, what I said earlier, it's almost like the more you leave the open, the high end untouched, the more right it will be, because that's what the instrument did. So now, two things. One thing, I do low cut a lot. And the reason is, like I mentioned earlier, I want to move crud and instruments out of the way of the bass and kick drum, but only below what is musically necessary. Of course, so for instance, and this is why one wants to be maybe a musician or learn about music theory, the lowest end of a guitar is 82 hertz, right? The E, unless it's tuned down to an E flat, whatever. See, there's your music theory for you. But so theoretically, there is no musical information under 82 hertz on a guitar, which is great because the bass, the low end is at 41 hertz. And so you have 40 hertz of space to have theoretically nothing going into your bass frequencies. So, but that takes work because there is amp noises. There's down there's not that much hum, so 60 hertz could be there. But there's cruds and there's little pops and there's footsteps. I get it. All of this stuff has to be cut out with low cut. So to me, I actually do think low cutting everything underneath is great, but I don't do it on the master, by the way. I do it on the individual channel because I can exactly decide where it has to be. I don't believe in like having to cut out low energies on the master on default. From time to time that helps. Okay, anyway, but I wanted to say, like, so I do low cut, I just don't do high cuts. The other thing is, imagine two black speakers like these two. When they don't play music and you close your eyes, it's like, it's actually not a white canvas, it's a black canvas because you don't see anything, right? To me, when you start playing music, that black canvas now gets filled with frequencies. And how bright or dark a record is has something to do with the actual arrangement first and the mixing second. If there's no bright instrument, the record will never be bright. And also, in a way, that black space that you now have in your head gets filled by high frequencies. Like put a triangle in there, all of a sudden there's a white sound up there at 12 kilohertz or something like that. So now imagine you have 20 instruments all having a little bit of high end, but most don't have 16 kilohertz in there. I mean, vocals do often, but like guitars end at like 5, 6, 7 kilohertz. Everything above that is noise or amp noise. You know, theoretically, a lot of instruments have like a harmonic overtone row that goes all the way up, but they do go down a level quite a bit. So basically, what I was just trying to protect in the low end with my low cuts, cutting everything out that shouldn't be there, I don't feel it is anywhere close to the level and prominence in the high cut. In the high end. So I'm not protecting anything by cutting off the very top of a record. So that being said, I listen to it. I do only EQ moves that are musically interesting. The brightest thing in the record is probably the vocal, and I don't high cut. Those are the things that I think create the appropriate brightness in a record. And I'm not saying that every record I'm doing is particularly bright, but I can definitely say I hate it when stuff sounds muddy and dark, you know, but you feel it out. And actually, when you talk with clients, I joked about this to a friend of mine recently, it seems like the hardest thing to do is to get exactly right what the client wants from a vocal, EQ wise. And that's totally fine because, again, it's creativity. But let's say I do a first mix and I EQ'd some beautiful high end into the vocal and it's reasonably lean and clean at the bottom, like 200, 300 hertz. So it's not muddy or anything like that. Whatever I come up with, like it might sound like the most awesome vocal ever mixed, hopefully. Right? Not always, but whatever. Do you know what I mean? It depends on the client. The client can say back, oh, I love this, is the best thing ever. Or they could say, now it's too lean, or it's still too thick. Like it's just their thing. And then at the end, I have to add some low mids or take down the high end. And it's not that they're wrong. It's just they hear vocals a little different. And it also makes me not wrong. And I'm also not sad about, okay, now I have to turn down the high end by like, well, let's say 3 dB, which is a lot. Right? It's just a different look at the place. So there's no right place. There's only right place for the genre, right place for the song at hand, and right place for the client where they hear music. And the answer is we have to get there and then provide what they want. That's what winning is there.
Cool. What are the 5 plugins you can't live without? And more importantly, what do you use each one for?
Okay, that's a very much too broad question. But I tell you, the first answer is go to emixing.com and buy one of my masterclasses, and I'll tell you all about it. The very short answer, and that's, by the way, there's like 2 on there. They're like 3 hours long each. They go through a C-pop song which is Chinese pop, but it doesn't even matter, right? It's just engineering info. It just happened to be some of their most successful songs, and that's why I chose them. Anyway, but, well, go there, do that. It's really good. That being said, I can tell you about the plugins that I wouldn't want to live with. The question is always funny because, of course, I don't have to. I bought so many plugins. It's just insane. And it's just like, oh, my God. Anyway. But things that I would really, really hate to not have available is at the very top is Auto Align by Sound Radix. I think in 2025 to mix drums without Auto Align, at least trying to make it sound better, is a huge loss. Like it's just such an easy, now you have more punch. There's everything that you ever wanted on drums. You don't even have to do anything like compression or anything like that. So that would be number one. That being said, the next one is similar, actually. It's Bass Rider by Waves, because it's just, I actually hate compressing basses. So I always feel like, why? I'd rather actually automate them by hand if it's an 808, because normally that's a repeating pattern. It doesn't take that long. I just automate them, to be even mostly. And then if it's a bass performance, like a live bass performance, I feel that a bass rider really evens out the actual performance. Basically, it shows me it highlights what the bass player hopefully meant I've never gotten a complaint going like, the bass doesn't work anymore, or it's too much bass ridden, right? But I did have compression comments in the past, like, oh, it's too compressed. Because a compressor to me is, I don't know if you guys look at it like that, but I do. A compressor is always two things at the same time. It has one task, which is make something more even. And then there's a second task, which is change the sound of an instrument, which is a byproduct of making it something even. Like you wanted it to be even, and you chose one like a VCA or an opto or something. And by the way it's making it even, it sounds different. It changes the envelope of the instrument, which is great. I mean, that's a cool tool, but you can't have one without the other. That's actually kind of frustrating. With Bass Rider, you can have one without the other, which is you ride the volume, but you don't change the sound. Fantastic. Now, with an harmonic saturator or like a transient designer, you can change the sound without changing the volume too much. But with a compressor, you always have both, and it always irks me. I was always like, why should there be just two different processes, and so Bass Rider works well. On the other hand, I don't like Vocal Rider. It's not that it's a bad plugin, but I guess I don't hear it does things that sound different than what I would do, so I can't do it. Some people are more successful with it, and it's fast, but I don't like it at all. Sorry, I think it's a great plugin that doesn't do what I want it to do. So there you go. That's what you call me, Waves. No. What else? I do like the Mech DSP Revolver plugin. That's their impulse reverbs, and mostly because you can sample your own reverbs. And I used to have a lot of hardware reverbs, and I sampled all of mine, and they sound exactly like I had them, basically. And maybe that's an answer to like, how do I get a good high end? Well, I add reverbs that are non-cluttering and have good quality, and Revolver does that for me. And there were two more that I definitely, I'm gonna kind of think about. One that's really good is Patchwork by Blue something.
Pat? Not Blue Cat? No, it's...
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Blue Cat. Yeah, Blue Cat Patchwork. And what it does, it's just like a little matrix that you can plug in plugins into a chain. It's very similar to the Studio Rack, I suppose, by Waves, but it's much older. They definitely had it first. Blue Cat had it first, and I do that a lot because I use that to have the TubeTech plugin that SoftTube makes, and then in parallel I have an 1176, but it's only one plugin, so I can use that on a vocal chain. So yeah, I have those on the on. It's probably always on a vocal. That's one of the few things that I do that I do always do, because I use the TubeTech plugin so gently, like never more than like 1 or 1.5 dB of gain reduction. I use it only for the sound, not really for the actual leveling. See, I can use a different compressor to level, and then this one just to have a shape. One last one. I'm going through my template in my head. I really, really, really like the Brainworks Plugin Alliance SSL 4000E, and that is on all my mixes, kind of it's almost my summing mixer, so to speak. And they have that thing that they call TNT, I think, where the left and the right channels can be selected separately, and they're slightly different, and then you click on a button and all the instances change them. And there is a tiny bit of width you get for that for free, so to speak. Like you don't have to do anything, and it's just there. So yeah, I would say that's a huge part of the way I like my Pro Tools to sound, so to speak.
Richard, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a lot of fun talking to you.
No, the same thing here. My website is richardfurch.com, emixing.com for my masterclasses, but there's also some around with Produce Like a Pro, Sonic Scoop, and well, YouTube everywhere. So just Google my name, you'll find me.
Cool. Thank you so much.